In today's video, we are breaking down the differences between two key study skills, annotating and note-taking. Both of these are tools that you can use to get more from the text that you're reading. They're skills, but like with any skill, you gotta know how and when to use them. So let's dive into what they are, how they're similar, how they differ, and when it's best to choose one strategy over another. Hi, I'm Katie Azevedo from SchoolHabits.com. I've been a teacher for nearly 20 years. I have a master's degree in special education, and I have taught thousands of students to learn and work smarter. And yes, annotating and note-taking are two strategies that are going to help you learn and work smarter too. All right, so let's start with the similarities between note-taking and annotating. Both strategies are ways to highlight important ideas from what it is that you're reading. They're both tools that can help you increase your comprehension of the text by slowing you down and getting you to think about what it is that you're reading so that you can process it and write something about it. Now, another similarity between the two strategies is that both must be guided by your purpose for reading the text in the first place. So whether you are annotating or note-taking, you need to ask yourself, what is the reason I'm reading this? Right? What is my goal? What is my end goal? What am I going to do with this text when I'm done with it? Are you reading to learn about a subject? Are you reading because you're forced to read it for a homework assignment and there's going to be a test on it? Are you reading a text to search for evidence and quotes that you're eventually going to use for a future essay? Now, I say this all of the time here in these videos and on my Learn and Work Smarter podcast. You have to have a reason for taking notes in the first place. Because if not, your notes and your annotations and even your comprehension is going to be all over the place. So there's really only two similarities between annotating and note-taking. It's that they both help increase your comprehension and they both must be guided by your purpose for reading the text in the first place. Now, let's move on to the differences because there are more differences than there are similarities. So just straight up, real simple. Annotating is when you mark up the text itself on the text. You can do this by highlighting and writing in the margins. If you don't own the book and it's a library book or a school-issued book, write them on sticky notes and you put those in the margins, but your notes remain in the book itself somehow, okay? So if you ever want to go back to your annotations, you're gonna need that original text, whether it's a book, whether it's a PDF, whatever format it's in, your annotations don't live separate from that text. Now, one thing I really want to emphasize and clarify here is that highlighting is not annotating. They are very different strategies, and in fact, they are very different words for a reason. Highlighting doesn't mean annotating. Annotating doesn't mean highlighting. So I'm not quite sure why we confuse these words so often and consider them the same thing. Highlighting is what? Taking a marker and swiping it across the page. That does nothing for comprehension. There is no processing and rephrasing and distilling in that process, right, of the information you're reading. You're literally taking a marker and right? Annotating is different, okay? Now, there is a time and a place for highlighting, but highlighting by itself is not annotating. Unless, here's the one scenario in which it would be helpful to highlight, I suppose, is if you are reading a text for one singular purpose only. So for example, if you're reading a short story and your goal is to find all examples of figurative language in that story and nothing else, you have no other goals for reading the story, just finding figurative language, then technically you could just use a highlight. Because when you go back into that text later, you're gonna know exactly why you highlighted everything that you did. But the minute that you have more than one purpose for reading the text or that you are highlighting beyond figurative language, then those highlights are gonna mean nothing to you when you go back to the text at a future point. So again, the minute that you are highlighting for more than one thing in the text, your highlights must be paired with a note in the text or on a sticky note, however you're doing it. I have an entire video called the Highlight and Rewrite Strategy in which I walk you through step by step how to pair your highlights with little notes that go with the highlights that will serve you in the future. When you come back to that text a few days later, a week later, and you look at your highlights and you're like, what did I even highlight this for? Your note tells you exactly what it is that you highlighted for. I'll leave that link in the description box. Now, on the other hand, note-taking involves extracting information from a text and putting it somewhere outside the text itself. So that could be in a notebook, that could be, in a Google Doc or Word doc, wherever it is that you're keeping your notes. Now the benefit here is that your notes are living outside of the text, and so you don't need access to the original material to review your notes. And so this can be helpful if you're working out of a library book or a school issued book or something that you're not planning on keeping in the future. Okay, so that's the difference between annotating and note-taking. Note-taking is outside of the text itself. You're extracting the important information and putting it somewhere else. And annotating is inside the text itself, either on the paper, like of the book or on the PDF, or on sticky notes. So at this point, you might be wondering, okay, there's similarities and differences, but when do I use each one? When should I take notes and when should I annotate? Awesome question. But it depends on a few different things. And I know it depends is like the least helpful answer, but hear me out because I'm gonna give you some scenarios that will be helpful for you to sort of like run through with your own situation and say, okay, this is my situation. This makes sense for me to use this tool at this time. Okay, that's the entire purpose of this video. So whether you should annotate or take notes depends on your personal preference, whether or not you're going to have access to that text in the future, why you're reading the text in the first place, and then what you intend to do with the notes when you are done reading the text. Is it for an essay? Is it for a test? Is it for your own future reference, right? So like your purpose. So let's break that down a little further. Annotating is a great option if you are going to have access to that text in the future. If it's a PDF, digital, or printed out, that's yours. Right? If it's a book and you own it, that's yours. So you can annotate all over it and come back to it whenever you need. Annotating is also ideal for shorter texts, especially if you have a physical copy. So let's say, for example, you are reading a 5-page article. It's probably simpler for you to just like take out a pen and a highlighter and annotate the text versus taking out a notebook and extracting all the information. Annotating might also be a good option if you intend to use your annotations within a short time frame. For example, let's say that you are in class and there's a reading assignment during the class, and at the end of class, you're supposed to, present or answer questions on what it is that you're reading. In that case, because you're reading the text and doing something with the text in the same sitting, I would suggest annotating rather than note-taking. Finally, annotating is going to be your better option if your thoughts about the text are going to be deeply connected to what you're writing about. So for example, let's say that you're reading something for rhetorical language. Okay, so annotating would be a good idea here because you're annotating for rhetorical language, but you're gonna have a lot to say about the author's use of that rhetorical language. So you're not just highlighting the metaphor, right? But you're highlighting the metaphor and you're saying, this metaphor means this. These are the things that they're comparing. This is an extended metaphor. This is what the author's really trying to say. In that case, you want the author's original language right next to your thoughts and your analysis of the language. Otherwise, if you were taking notes in that scenario, you would have to copy over the entire metaphor from the original text into your notes in order for your analysis on that metaphor to make sense. Does that make sense? So that's what I mean by annotating might be the more efficient, quicker, simpler tool to use in that scenario. Because anything that's time consuming creates friction, and anything that has a lot of friction, we don't like to do. But annotating is definitely not for every situation. Sometimes note-taking really is the best method. So when is it best to take notes? I'll start with the basic. Note-taking is the better option if you're not going to have long-term access to the original text. Library book, school-issued book, something like that. So when you return the book, you still have your notes on the book. You don't lose them. Another situation where note-taking makes sense is if you're working with a digital text. Not everybody, is using an iPad and the note-taking apps and the Apple Pencil and all that stuff. If you do and you like to take your notes that way, then you can annotate. Right? But if you're working with a long digital text, maybe it's like a textbook that you can't annotate. Or maybe it's like a really, really long PDF. You're reading a book, but you're reading the PDF version. And that would just be too much to upload into your note-taking app. Then note-taking would be the better option in that scenario. Finally, note-taking is going to be the better option if you have the intention of eventually expanding on the information that you're writing about. So let's say, for example, that you're reading Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird and you're taking notes on Atticus Finch's examples of strength in the story. And let's say this is for a future essay. If you take notes then not only do you have a place to put your notes from the text, but you also have a place to put your notes and your ideas for your essay, right? And maybe some ideas on your analysis and how you're going to structure your essay. They're all going to be in one spot, because if you were annotating, you're not going to put anything in the margins of the text other than your thoughts on that text. Does that make sense? So that's what I said at the beginning of the video, that when you're trying to decide whether it's annotating or note-taking that's best for your scenario, it is so important for you to identify what you're going to be doing with that information when you're done reading the text. So if you do choose to take notes rather than annotate, but you're like, but I don't know how to, I think that's a better option, but I don't know how to, I've got you covered. A few different options. The number one best way for you to master your note-taking skills is to join me inside SchoolHabits University. That's my online study skills course where I teach you the 6 most critical skills for school. So study skills, task management, time management, annotating, note-taking, and organization. That link is in the description box, but it's schoolhabitsuniversity.com. I also have a few other note-taking resources that you will find helpful, as well as annotation resources, and I will leave all of those in the description box too. Some of them are blog posts, some of them are YouTube videos, and then some of them are podcast episodes. But listen, before we wrap up this video, this is important. I want you to use the information that you learned here about the differences between annotating and note-taking on a case-by-case scenario. It's not that you're gonna listen to this video and decide that note-taking is the one for you, because it is gonna vary depending on what you're reading and why you're reading it. Right? You gotta weigh the pros and cons. You gotta think about the purpose you're reading. What are you gonna do with that information in the future? And you know what? You make a choice, you go with it, and if you choose wrong, oh well, you do something different the next time. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe. Thank you so much for watching.